We do want to begin with breaking news. Former Vice President Dick Cheney, considered to be one of the most influential VPs in U.S. history, has died.
In nearly a 4-decade career in Washington, D.C., his prominent rise to power that would take him to the vice presidency at its height. It was extremely polarizing, if you remember the time. A statement from his family reads that Cheney died due to complications of pneumonia and heart disease. So let's talk with our Joe Torres. He's here now with a look back on his life, but also, Joe, I think an enduring legacy, particularly in foreign policy.
Yes, for sure, Sam. And we got word today of his death yesterday. The family put out a statement, and we'll explain why. But Dick Cheney, yes, he took vice presidential power to a new level, effectively guiding two Republican commanders-in-chief during some of the most pivotal moments in modern American history. And in the process, Dick Cheney divided the American public's views on war, on peace, and on how much influence a vice president can wield. Washington insiders call Dick Cheney the force behind President George W. Bush, a notoriously silent but powerful VP who became an outspoken defender of the Bush administration and an ardent critic of President Obama.
When they've made all the decisions they've had, close Guantanamo, end the high-value detainee program and so forth. I think those are all mistakes.
He was beloved by conservatives, vilified by the left, and often compared to a Star Wars villain.
They wouldn't call me Darth Vader for nothing.
He was known for his increasingly conservative views on nearly everything but gay rights, perhaps because he had a gay daughter. Richard Bruce Cheney was born in 1941 in Lincoln, Nebraska. He grew up in Casper, Wyoming, and married Lynn Ann Vincent in 1964. Cheney first arrived in Washington in 1969 to work for President Nixon's chief of staff, Donald Rumsfeld, before he replaced his mentor in 1975. When Jimmy Carter defeated President Ford, Cheney returned to Wyoming, ran for Congress, and served 5 terms until President George H.W. Bush asked him to serve as Secretary of Defense. After a stint as head of defense contractor Halliburton, Cheney returned to run George W. Bush's Vice Presidential Selection Committee and was selected himself.
The person who was best qualified to be my vice presidential nominee was working by my side.
After 9/11, Cheney was influential in formulating the U.S. response. The doctrine of preemptive action widened the war on terror from Afghanistan to Iraq.
We have a further responsibility to help keep the peace of the world and to prevent the terrorists and their sponsors from plunging the world into horrific violence.
He faced challenges in and out of the White House. He shot a campaign contributor in the face during a 2006 quail hunt. A year later, he witnessed the conviction of his former chief of staff, Louis Scooter Libby, on charges of obstruction of justice and perjury. President George W. Bush later commuted Libby's sentence. Cheney's daughter Liz was one of 10 Republicans who voted to impeach former President Trump for his role in the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol. Dick Cheney came to the Capitol on the first anniversary of that dreadful day. Though a political lightning rod, Cheney will be remembered by his allies as a man who served his country with conviction. Former President George W. Bush released a statement this morning saying, in part, the death of Richard B. Cheney is a loss to the nation and a sorrow to his friends. History will remember him as among the finest public servants of his generation, a patriot who brought integrity, high intelligence, and seriousness of purpose to every position he held. We are still awaiting for a statement from President Trump. So, a polarizing figure, without question, for sure.
Without a doubt, but you could tell that his influence on the presidency and the Republican Party is one that's going to be studied for generations.
And Shirlene, he was a right-wing hawk. And when he made the decision, and you'll remember, during the last presidential election between Kamala Harris and President Trump, and he said, I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris, like a scene out of The Exorcist. People's head spun completely around on both sides.
I was just going to ask you that, Joe, because I have the end of the statement in front of me. It says, as citizens, we have a duty to put country, and this is a direct quote from Dick Cheney, country above partisanship to defend our Constitution. That's why I'll be casting my vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. It was a lightning rod.
And you heard people on the left say he's finally seen the light, and you heard people on the right saying, I don't know what sort of drugs he's been taking, but this is very different from the Dick Cheney that we knew.
It does seem like two different maybe the old guard of the Republican Party.
Yes.
At this point, in comparison to what it is today.
And he was in charge of the Republican Party. He wielded with an iron fist for sure. And for him to turn around and saying, "I'm casting a ballot for Kamala Harris," people at the time just simply couldn't believe it. But he did.
Yep.
Joe, so good to have you.
Thank you both.
Joe Torres.
Good to have you on the
Appreciate
show.
You always.